Welcome everyone to Superbet Blitz in Warsaw. We have Alireza Firouzja there with the white pieces taking on Praggnanandhaa. Now they both had a crazy game in the rapid section where it was drawn, but in the end Alireza managed to outwit Praggnanandhaa. What will this game hold for both of them remains to be seen. You can see Pragg very focused, adjusting all his pieces. Firouzja as well. They both have lost their first two games in Blitz. This is the third game. So both very eager to win. D4, knight f6, c4, e6. And let's see what Alireza does here. Will he bring his knight out to f3 or knight to c3? He plays knight c3, allowing Pragg to go for the Nimzo Indian and plays the a3 line, which is very direct. It asks the question to the bishop, what are you doing here? Pragg takes, giving his opponent doubled pawns. But white has the bishop pair and the ability to expand in the center. c5 played. Now, fixing these two pawns, e3, trying to get the bishop out. Later on, will push e4 to get the other bishop out as well. And Pragg making sure he has his move order right. b6. One of the main ideas is to put the bishop on a6 and put pressure on the c4 pawn. Firouzja now thinking about what he ought to be doing. He plays bishop d3. That's a good move. Bishop b7, attacking the pawn here on g2. And logically, you want to get your knight out, but maybe then f pawn gets blocked. So he pushes his pawn to f3. Knight comes out to c6. Again, look at how Pragg's developing. He's developing in a way that he can put pressure on the c4 pawn here. Maybe the rook will come to c8. Short castle has been played. And Firouzja plays e4, threatening bishop g5. So Pragg instantly goes knight e8. These are well-known themes in the Nimzo Indian that Pragg is aware of. And he quickly plays his knight there. Alireza castles and now bishop a6 played. You might think this is actually a loss of tempo. But later on when white will play f4, he also has placed his pawn from f3 to f4. So it will get compensated. Well, you can see Firouzja pushing his pawn forward, e5, opening up the bishop's path. This can get very dangerous for black if he's not careful. Pragg nicely plays his knight to a5. Now there's a lot of pressure on this pawn on c4. But generally white ignores it. He plays f4 so that if bishop c4, he can push forward with f5, threatening f6 as well. So let's see if Firouzja goes for f4 here. Or does he try to somehow protect this pawn with some move like queen a4? Although that feels a bit wrong, putting your queen to defend this pawn on c4. It seems like Alireza is out of his prep. He's taking his time. He's down to 4 minutes, less than 4 on the clock. Pragg has 4 minutes 30 seconds. He plays f4. Now, this is a dangerous moment. Praggnanandhaa can take the pawn on c4, but then has to be ready for f5, or he can himself push his pawn to f5, which he does. Fantastic move here, because if you take en passant, then after knight f6, black is very happy. f5 blocks the bishop, but here white has an amazingly interesting move, which is to push the pawn to d5. And how does this work? Because if you play bishop c4, I can then go d6 and completely, Firouzja goes d5 now. He pushes, and this is a very important moment, because if Pragg takes this pawn d6, the knight cannot come out easily. He has to go g6, knight g7, and this is excellent compensation for white. So that's the reason why the best move here is d6. It's a very powerful move, and it absolutely stops opponent's ideas, and actually it becomes very difficult for white to play, because white has overextended himself quite a bit and needs to play like a machine to hold balance. So d6 is my move of choice here. Let's see if Praggnanandhaa comes up with that as well. This has been played before in few of the games. There's a very famous Judith Polgar game here in which bishop c4 and d6 is played. And you can see Pragg now finally taking a lot of time to understand the nuances of this position. Also, one thing one must notice is that white has the bishop pair. But if you see, there are two pawns which really prevent the bishops from getting active. One is the pawn on f5 and the other is the pawn on c5. You know, these two bishops. Yes, d6 played. Fantastic move here by Praggnanandhaa. And now Alireza has so many questions here. Should he take the pawn on d6? Should he take the pawn on e6? Of course, taking on e6 makes a lot of sense. And there's also this very, very direct move g4 in which you are directly hacking onto the f5 pawn. So a lot of options here for Firouzja, and he has to kind of find all of that in 3 minutes. Okay, e takes d6 just doesn't make sense because of queen d6. So d takes e6 played and queen e7. I love this move that Pragg has played. He wants to take on e6 with his queen. Also remember, the pressure on the g3, on the c4 pawn is quite a lot. g4 played here and Pragg again plays g6. I love how he wants to maintain this pawn even at the risk of it getting isolated, because this pawn is limiting the bishop in a big, big way. So a lovely move g6 here. And now Alireza, I think, wants to take, he wants to put his knight on g3, putting pressure on f5, maybe put the queen here and hope that that is the point where Pragg will kind of break down on the f5 square. Alireza thinking hard here. He has some ideas like knight g3, rook a2, rook g2. You know, you have to play in this very creative fashion here, because if you don't do that, you will get into a big, big trouble here. Meanwhile, look at Firouzja's time. He's down to 1 minute 30 seconds. He has a look at the clock and he's like, well, I have to rush now. He takes on f5. Pragg immediately recaptures. gf5 taken, and now knight to g3 played. Pragg quickly gets his knight to g7, defending the pawn. So attack twice, defended twice. f5 pawn is not going away anywhere. Maybe rook a2 with the idea of rook d2 makes a lot of sense now. But look at Firouzja's clock time. He's almost down to a minute. He goes rook e1. And now can Pragg simply capture on e6? Because yes, there's a rook standing here, but after e takes d6, you simply move with your queen here. There's no good discovered check. Maybe you have to think of bishop f5, but there is knight takes f5 defending the queen. So that doesn't seem to work. He takes here. Pragg takes the pawn on e6 with the queen. Great chess here. And now Firouzja also has to worry about the c4 pawn. Not an easy position at all for white to play, and that is what has been the experience of white players. If they are not well prepared, they could get into big trouble. Bishop f1 played, and the idea of this move is to put the bishop perhaps on h3 or on the g2 square, maybe then to d5. Aha, that's a nice idea here. And Pragg now can get his final piece into the game. Rook a d8. What a nice move, because even if you play bishop g2 here, I have bishop c4 controlling the d5 square. So there is no time for you to get your bishop out from that diagonal, and I love this move by Pragg. It's such a simple centralizing move, but it brings the last piece into the game. And now Firouzja there shaking his head. He's like, well, I played almost 14 moves of theory and now we are on move 20 and I'm in a lost position. What went wrong? Well, I think the thing that has gone wrong is that this line in itself is very, very dangerous. White has to be very well prepared here. Bishop b7 attacking the queen. The queen has to move. And now pawn takes pawn by Pragg. Look at Pragg's focus there. Laser sharp. Rook takes e5 attacking the queen. Can Pragg put his rook or queen on the long diagonal? He does it. There's no threat of mate now because the knight controls it. But surely this is such a big weakening of the diagonal. Rook d6. And a very smart plan here by Pragg. He wants to go to g6 and simply checkmate on h1. That is his idea. And rook e7 played. Well, Alireza is hoping that he can sack his rook for the bishop here. That would be a lot of relief for him. But of course, that position would be worse then. So rook g6 can be played here. Pragg decides to get rid of the intruder. He's like, if you take here, I take here. Now my rook will come to g6. You have nothing. Alireza thinks the bishop is more important than the rook. He gives up his exchange. Queen takes b7 taken. And now rook e1 played. Alireza down to 4 seconds. He has hardly any time. Pragg has 2 minutes. Wow, what a game this is turning out to be. Queen f3 played. Will Alireza get any counterplay here? H4, he's trying for h5, h6, hoping to get some counterplay against the f5 pawn if he can get bishop on h3. But Pragg's major pieces are so well placed on the two open highways on the board. h6 played, h5, trying to gain even more space. And now queen e8, putting pressure here. King f2 played. And Alireza is down to 3 seconds on the clock. Pragg puts his king on the side of the board. Alireza, too slow, loses on time. Praggnanandhaa wins in a completely better position. What great play by Pragg. Amazing opening prep, amazing play in the opening, then in the middle game, getting a great position. And with this, he scores his first win in the Superbet Blitz 2025.